Welcome to the second episode of the Anything Mentionable podcast. I'm your host, Tim Madigan. First, I want to thank all of you who joined us for the first episode. My conversation with grief therapist, Dr. Patrick O'Malley, the author and college professor now. It was very gratifying to Patrick and I both that some of you wrote to us or told us that the podcast landed in their life at a moment when they were suffering, and that they found some comfort and information that was helpful to them, and that was obviously very gratifying and meaningful to Patrick and I. If you want to find that episode, it's on our YouTube channel and Spotify, and I think eventually we're going to be up very soon on Apple. Also, we'd love to build a community around these conversations. So as you're listening, if you could hit the subscribe button, if you're so inclined, that would be great, and much appreciated. So anyway, here we go with the second episode. My guest today is a person named Maddie Suttles, who is about to be a second-year law student at the University of Houston Law Center. And I think she is an emerging voice for good in our world. And I think that by the end of our conversation, you will understand why I believe that way and why so many people do. Maddie, welcome. So great. We're taping this at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning when you're probably exhausted after a busy week. So we really appreciate you're doing this for us, and I hope that when we're finished, you can chill out in the way you deserve. So anyway, welcome, Maddie.
Thank you for having me.
You have a very busy schedule. You're starting a new internship with a law firm in Houston. You just finished one with a federal judge in Dallas. You got a mock trial stuff going on. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I moved to Dallas for 6 weeks. Up there, I was with a federal judge, and that was an amazing experience. I knew going into law school that I wanted to do a judicial internship, so I was happy to check that goal off of my dream list. And then my favorite class in law school was torts, and you take that typically first semester. And so I knew going into the summer I wanted to do something in the torts field, personal injury. So that's why I decided to split my summer. And I'm working in mass torts in Houston now. So that's kind of how I geared my schedule. And then I just made the national mock trial team. So we are doing an inter team mock trial tournament next weekend. So that's what I'm preparing for right now. So it's a little bit busy. It's fun.
As I told you a minute ago, just hearing this makes me tired, but you're much younger than I am, so you have more energy, I guess. If you would indulge me for a second, and our listener as well, I want to tell a bit of a story that kind of explains how I became interested in having you on this program. In the fall of 2023, our play that I wrote with your friend and mentor and Professor Harry Parker, the play is called "I'm Proud of You," made its world premiere at Circle Theater in downtown Fort Worth, and it was just the show is the story of my friendship with television's Fred Rogers. Circle Theater is this just magical subterranean world in downtown Fort Worth, of a place of civility and art and beauty. And we just had the most magnificent experience there. It was a great run, big crowds, tears, laughter, all the things you want from live theater. And then I thus became a huge fan of live theater. And so that show closed, and the next one was a play called Artemisia that began, I believe, in February of 2024. And so obviously I was going to go back for that, and I did. And Artemisia is the story of one of the most prominent, or maybe the most prominent painters in the Renaissance, a female painter who obviously had to overcome a lot in her life. And it was a great play and wonderful production, really wonderful cast of the best professional actors in this area. There's one actor in particular who made a huge impression on me. And it was a young woman, young actor named Maddie Suttles, who actually played two roles, who played young Artemisia and Artemisia's daughter later on in the play. But you made a huge impression on me. I just thought we'll talk more about this later. I thought your performance was really affecting. And so I look through the program and I see this person has yet to graduate from TCU, that she is an acting student at TCU. And so I called up Harry, or I texted him, or whatever, however we communicate these days, and I said, I saw Artemisia, and there's this young actor who made a real impression on me. Her name is Maddie, and I see she's studying at TCU. Do you know her? Because I said, I think she's really special. And I said, am I imagining things, or and he said, no, she's special. But then he said, she's not going to pursue acting after she graduates. She's going to law school. And my initial reaction was to be disappointment, because I wanted to be able to say in 10 or 15 years when you were famous, that I saw you at Artemisia in the basement of Circle Theater. But then he said, and the reason she's doing that is because she wants to be an advocate for her community. And there's no way to argue with that. And then just in the last month, Harry and I went to lunch as we often do at this pizza place on Hewland Street. And we had scarcely sat down when Harry said, I want to read something to you. And so he did. He pulled out a cell phone and he read me the essay that you had written and just published on social media about your experiences in immigration court as a legal intern. And it was a profoundly affecting thing. And I don't think I had left the restaurant before I'd started to think, I want to get this person on the Anything Mentionable podcast. And so here we are. Again, thanks again. I talked to Harry yesterday, in fact, about you, because I was doing my homework, and he sends his love and best regards and wants me to tell you how proud he is of you. So anyway, let's jump into the deep end if we can. In this essay to which I refer, there is many things you said that have stayed with me, but one line in particular kind of jumped out. And it is, I fully believe that God led me down this path because I was I was created to be the change. I was created to be the change, which I think is a bold and brave and beautiful declaration. So talk to me about that. Where did that come from? What does it mean?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think when people think about my transition from theater to law, a lot of people have a lot of questions. And I think a lot of people anticipate that it was this big dramatic shift in my life, that something must have happened, but not necessarily. I always was very fascinated in the idea of becoming a lawyer, even when I was little, but I was always put into professional theater. So I never really had the time or the chance to kind of understand what my future in that field might look like. And then when I got to high school, my freshman year, I was in a history class and we had to write about a current event. And so that was during Trump's first administration. And I wrote about the immigration policies in place then. And my history teacher was the one that told me that I should be a lawyer then. And I was like, "Oh no, I'm going to go on Broadway and I'm going to do the whole thing." And he was like, "Okay, but just know that this is something that I really think that you could do. Like you could do it. You're smart enough to do it." And so it's always been in the back of my head. I just kind of wanted to put that out there. But that's the first time that I felt like my words actually held weight. Um, he had me read it out to the principal at that time, and he said the same thing. That's what kind of got me into higher level English classes. That was the first time that someone actually gave me notice that my voice had power. I'm a relatively reserved person. So I think, while an extrovert might know that very early on, it took me years to kind of step into my voice. So the second that I realized that my voice had weight, I then had the really big task of realizing that I had to do something with it. And I joined a lot of organizations at TCU that revolved around politics and law in general before I decided, okay, I'm actually going to start applying to law school. And doing volunteer work and speaking to certain groups of people, I realized that I can't not help as much as I can, especially in a political climate where I think young people are told that we can't really do much. So the best I can do is, like I wrote in my essay, is to implore people to have kindness and try to open their hearts to what a world might look like if we realize that we're not all that different from each other. So
Correct.
that's what I meant by being the change. I think once you realize that your voice does have weight, you have to realize that you can do something with it and you should.
Do you uh, this uh, this philosophy, this feeling, this humanitarian desire? Did it? What were were there earlier influences from family, faith? Could you go a little bit further back and kind of tell us how you became who you are?
Sure. I like to say that I think I've always been an advocate for others, just in a very different way. I think now I'm used to being a leader. I'm very comfortable taking on leadership positions. I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people. But at first, I remember when I first got into theater, I was very shy. I was very nervous. And I think theater really brought me out of my shell in that way because I could be a different person. Um, so I could kind of hide behind a different persona. And early on, I think I realized, when people were wronged, whether it was probably earliest was my brother. Like my brother is very quiet. He especially was as a child. And so I would advocate very fiercely for my brother, whether it was at school or when our cousins wouldn't play with him and only wanted to play with me. It started there. And I think a normal kid would say something like, "Oh, please let my brother play." But I would get so furious. Like you would think that we were honestly battling in court. I was like, "I don't understand. Give me the facts on why you're leaving him out. I just don't get it." I was very curious as a kid. I was told to stop asking questions a lot of the time. Um, I think it's those traits early on that made me realize, okay, I want to be in a position where people have to answer my questions.
Is that where the lawyer thing came in?
Yes, I look back and my mom is even like, "Yeah, you're such a lawyer." It's just I like when people answer my questions. I like because I think I don't I've been told I don't really seem like someone. I give like opening statements and people are like, "Oh wow, I wasn't expecting that from you. Like you look so nice and I'm very short." just for the viewers that don't know me. And so they're like, I wasn't expecting that. And so I liked that. It was my first mock trial competition. I was like, oh, I like that you guys weren't expecting this. I could make a
Mhm.
career off of that.
Right. Well, and, you say people, you want to be in a profession where people have to answer your questions, and you say, well, I've got a subpoena, so here you go.
Now you're forced.
That
Exactly.
doesn't happen as often in the theater, I don't imagine. uh,
Exactly.
the so where did the acting part come in? And one of the things that Harry and I were talking about the other day is that, and I think you could look at it two different ways. One is that they're vastly different worlds, especially studying theater and going to law school. But I think you could
Yes.
probably also make a case that maybe they aren't all that different. So how would you speak to that?
Yeah. So, um, it was interesting. I was talking to my mom. I think I was going into my junior year of college, and she asked me what I was going to do once I graduated. Because at that point, for years, since I was maybe in like sixth grade, I said I was going to go to New York and do the acting thing. Um, and suddenly I just didn't really want to do that, which meant that I didn't really know where I was going to go. And I don't really know how to describe it to you, but in that conversation, I randomly opened my mouth and I said, I'm going to go to law school. It was a very like random thing to happen. And my mom was like, okay. And I remember going downstairs and I told my dad, and he was like, okay. And no one seemed surprised.
Hmm.
And I said, this is not going to be the same reaction that I'm going to get at school. This is not
Right.
going to be, it's just not. So I remember I went to school and I didn't tell anyone. And I started studying for the LSAT and I did not tell anyone. And I finally told some of my friends, and my closest friends were like, oh, okay, cool. And I said, is this not like a random change? And they said, no, not really.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I love Harry, and he was the first professor I ever told that I was going to go to law school. At that point, I was taking the LSAT, um, I think the next week, and it kind of slipped out. I was walking down the hallway. I was leaving his class with another student, and that student was like, "Oh, when you go to Dallas to take the LSAT next week," and I was like, "Oh God." No, my worst fear. I'm going to have to explain to my
Hmm.
professors that I'm not
Hmm.
doing this. And Harry had no reaction. He just said, "Oh, that's going to be great." And I was like, "Okay, maybe this isn't as bad as I thought it would be." I was really afraid of the imposter syndrome that I was going to be given. And a lot of people did give me the, "Oh, it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. You're so good." And I did get that. But Harry's reaction was first. And he also brought me to TCU. So his reaction had a lot more weight to it because I really valued his opinion. And I think if Harry was like, "Oh, I don't think this would be good for you," I would have probably listened to him. Um, so early on, it was very difficult for me inside, and I didn't know how to make the switch, and I was very afraid because it is different, and I was told it would be very different. A lot of my friends that were political science majors or criminal justice majors, they kind of had a taste for taking some kind of law-based class, and I had not. I had no clue. I was like dancing at 8 a.m. I had
Hmm.
no clue what it would
Hmm.
be like to write an essay on the criminal justice system. So I was very scared of that. And I remember it was Harry, I believe, and some other professors that told me it wasn't going to be that different. That the schooling would be different, but the actual practice and the skills that I have, the soft skills of knowing how to talk to people and um, things like that, were going to translate pretty well. So going into law school, I was under that security blanket of like, I hope this is going to be very similar. And the classroom was not similar at all. I was used to at TCU, a lot of obviously group work. You're working together on scenes. Memorization comes very easily for me, which is great now in my work, but it was very, very, very different. I'm not a test taker, and I kind of was able to happily fly by TCU because my tests were a monologue or a
Hmm.
scene. And so it was very different than having one exam for the entire semester. And I remember first semester, I came home to my mom and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. This is a lot. This is a lot different than what I'm used to. But then I got into oral advocacy and it's the exact same. It's
Mm-hmm.
the exact same. Telling a story is all that I have to do. And the second that a lawyer broke it down to me and it was like, actually, in your work, before you even start talking, find the story and just tell it through documents. That was when I realized that I made the right choice, that it
Mm.
was not that different. But it did take a long time for me to realize that for sure.
Um, that was kind of the piece of it I thought was going to be similar. I mean, the classroom work, the study was going to be different. And I've been in some of Harry's classes, and it's a very kind of cool vibe. And I don't know you can really ever call a law school class a cool vibe, but
No.
but getting into the courtroom, art, telling the story, given the closing argument, I could see how those things would be while you're training as an actor would uh, come in really handy there. Let's talk about Artemisia. Um, the story I heard is that you had gone out to New York to do a showcase, and that Ashley White, who is the artistic director at Circle, saw you and said, "You need to audition for this role," and you did, and obviously you got the part. Uh, but it's a big role, as I remember it. It's been a couple of years now. I mean, it's there's some big feelings, there's some tragedy, there's romance, there's humor. It's not as if you had two lines and away you go. I mean, you had to be and were fully invested in that character or those characters, um, and again, you're surrounded by older, more experienced professional actors. What was that experience like for you to do that play?
uh, that was just honestly probably one of the best experiences I've had in my life. It was such a unique, like you said, Ashley did see me when I was doing a panel audition to go to New York. So I left the
Hmm.
room and I wasn't even like 3 feet out of the room before one of my professors said, "Hey, there's a show going on at Circle. They want you to audition." And I was like, "Oh, when?" And she was like, "Tonight." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Okay." And I had, funnily enough, Harry's directing class, and I had to go to tech for my show that I was directing. And I remember being like, okay, how am I going to work this out logistically? And I went downstairs, told Harry. Harry obviously said, go. And I went with my friend, and I was like, this is a crazy experience. I don't even know what's going on. And within 20 minutes, I was in front of the lovely people at Circle Theater. And I remember, obviously, Showcase is a time of imposter syndrome, and you don't feel like an adequate actor at all. So I honestly didn't really feel like my audition went that well. And then I suddenly, got the call that I was playing Artemisia. I grew up in a very artsy household. My mom loves art. I spent my childhood running around museums all the time. And so being able to play an artist, and such a prevalent one too, was such a blessing. Um, the process itself was so unique because that was the first time that I've ever, like you said, worked with older actors that kind of gave me a lot of, I guess, a lot to look up to and a really high mark to meet every day. Her story is quite difficult to swallow, I would say. She went through a lot, especially in her young years, which I got to portray. And so doing the research for her and working through it was very interesting because it she was traumatized. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to do that
Right.
respectfully was a beautiful thing to be able to work on. There was a lot written in the script about certain scenes of her childhood that are really traumatic. And I remember our director, when we were working on it for the first time, and we were doing like an intimacy whole thing. And she said, I want to be respectful of the audience because there's no need of putting them through all of this to show what she went through. Like, we don't want to traumatize them as well.
Right.
And I think that was the first time that I was like, okay, we're creating such a safe show, which I was really worried about when I first got the script because she did go through so much. I was really worried about having to portray that every night. And I did have to, but to less of an extent that it was just where it needed it to be.
Mm-hmm.
The cast itself was really great. We all got along so well. Just such a good time. It was such a safe environment to fall on your face, try something new. Young Artemisia was such a spunky character. She had so much life in her, and it got taken away from her. And so being
Mm-hmm.
able to portray that early on and then portray it getting ripped away from her and her transitioning into her older self. Also, later on, being able to be her daughter. And I think working through that and showing so much of Artemisia lives in her daughter, so much of like the fire and the her being so stubborn. It was such a beautiful show to do, and everyone a part of that. I have nothing negative to say about that show at all.
Well, it was really quite remarkable, and um, uh, for and I appreciate the insights you're sharing now because I was wondering what it was like for you to do that role. And you obviously you did it very well. And let's see, had a thought and it just escaped me. Oh, I just this is as we're speaking, the uh, this is more for my producer Sam, but we have a couple of production photo or I have a production photo of you in the play that we'll be putting up there while we're talking about the play, and also a picture of you and Lauren Gunderson, the playwright who came in for I guess a couple of shows or a show, and you look like you're having a good time, and everybody thought it was wonderful to have her there. Did she have any feedback or reaction to your performance?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I want to start by saying the second that I heard that she was going to come, I started geeking out. Like her plays are amazing. Also, just being able to play Artemisia in her play of Artemisia was crazy. But yeah, I was super nervous that day. She is so kind. She is just such a humble woman. She loved it. She thought that we all did a really great job with it, which was so nice to hear. And we got to hang out with her after she saw the show, um, which is probably where that one photo of me looking
Mm,
extremely excited comes from, was after she saw
yes.
it. Yeah, and I think it's funny because at that point, I also knew that I would be playing another one of her characters for New York Showcase. So I was going to be doing a scene from her play I and You. So it was just a full Lauren Gunderson fiesta in my last
Yeah.
semester at TCU. So it was really nice to meet her, and she seemed to love the performance, which I'm
Yeah.
very glad of.
Yeah, it was fun to. I know that y'all had so much fun with her, and she is a very prominent person in the American theater. So I know that it was a big deal for everyone. Let's switch gears. Um, how did you get into immigration court? Now you were interning for a federal judge. How did that assignment happen, and what did you see when you got there?
So I was under a magistrate judge, which means that I saw a lot of different things. But a really fascinating thing about my internship was that the judges really emphasize being able to go to other courts and see what they have going on. So that's how I got to do it. I never had any immigration matters with my specific judge, but we listened in on and got to witness a lot of different matters, whether it was fraud in the criminal system, um, or immigration. One of which that sticks out to me today was I remember getting to the courtroom and there was a huge protest outside. And I got upstairs and the clerk that worked with me just said, stay inside chambers today, which you normally did, but sometimes we would go get coffee. Um, and there's like a wiretap kind of system into each courtroom. So we got to listen in on an immigration hearing, and there was a huge protest for said immigration hearing outside. And I think that really spoke to me because I remember there were some frustrations about how loud the protest was. And I was like, well, that's kind of the point. Like it's the point is so that we are uncomfortable in our big federal building. So I remember that. And I remember going up to my floor, and there were a lot of times where I would direct people to the immigration offices to get help. And in order for me to help them, I would typically ask for their paperwork so that I could tell them exactly, which area. And just kind of reading through very briefly, like their paperwork and being able to point them in that direction and seeing the fear and the anxiety and knowing that I will never have to deal with that made me realize how privileged I was very early on. I remember I was asked for help for directions my first day, and I was like, I don't even know where I'm going, but I can try. So, yeah, I saw a lot of fear from what I can say, and I heard a lot of fear and uncertainty, lots of children, which was sad. But yeah, that was that was always in another court, but it was a very unique thing to be able to witness, especially in today's political climate.
Could you read your essay?
Of course I can.
Um, it's it explains a lot, and so anyway, I'd love to hear it in your voice.
Sure. Okay. I'm going into my second year of law school, and I'm currently serving as a judicial intern for the United States of America at the federal level. No 2 days are the same, and I have been blessed to have been exposed to a multitude of different legal issues, one of which is a hot topic of immigration. I have witnessed a multitude of detention hearings thus far. Sometimes children younger than the ages of 10 have to represent themselves in court. Many of them do not even understand what a lawyer is. This is a representation of due process, which every person is entitled to in the United States. Everyone, even those who are not citizens of the United States, is entitled to this right as a matter of law. I'm immensely passionate about the law, and I wake up every day looking forward to the day when I can be a practicing attorney. I fully believe God let me down this path because I was created to be the change and to help those within and outside of my community. This is very real. And just because you are privileged enough to not be able to comprehend families being ripped apart, they are. Yes, as someone in the legal profession, I understand that there are rules, and these rules must be followed. But I also believe that we should follow the golden rule: treat others the way you would want to be treated. I believe that at the very least, we should be humane. I'm publicly commenting on this in the hope that we all learn to spread a little more love in this time of great adversity. Though many of you will not be able to understand the fear and danger of our current political situation, I pray that your hearts and minds open up to the possibility of what our world would look like if we decide to pray for those who come from different walks of life and offer our support. Regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, I implore you to treat people like human beings. Despite language and geographical differences, when you peel back our skin, we are all the same. Check yourself before you judge acts of desperation that you are blessed to know nothing about. And then I quoted Leviticus 19:33-34. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. And then Jesus said in Matthew 25, when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me.
Just take a second to let that sink in. It was, from in the conception of this podcast, I decided early on that I didn't want it to be something where you disappear down the rabbit hole of politics every time. There's plenty of places where you can find that kind of content, and this isn't necessarily going to be one of them, at least not on a regular basis. However, I do think that given, there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement of this moment. The difficult, as you allude to in your essay, this very difficult moment that we live in. And but how do you acknowledge it? And my own theory about it is that the way you acknowledge it, or way to live in this time, is you try to love everybody as best you're able, even those who disagree with you, and you try to articulate or speak up for not what you're against necessarily, but what you believe. What you believe are the highest virtues that we aspire to. What you believe a good and moral life looks like. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast was because your essay did that in such a beautiful way. My comment, when I think I might have said when Harry wrote it to me, we just kind of sat there for a few seconds, and one of the word I used with him to describe it was that essay is unassailable. It was written with such love and wisdom and compassion that it's very, very hard to criticize. And I think that that is kind of, if you're coming from that place, I think that it's much more constructive and productive than coming from the place of sending flying, snarky messages on social media to people who disagree with you. And so I congratulate you for that. And any along those lines, do you have anything you want to say about what, how we can be in this moment?
Yes. I think it's really hard to have these conversations. And I think the second that we think that it's easy, we do ourselves a very big disservice. There will be nothing good will come from meeting people with anger or hate. There's enough of that. There's enough. there are some of my friends, I have friends of a multitude of differing views. We some of them we do not agree at all on very fundamental things. And I have been asked, "Oh, well, how can you be friends with that person?" And I'm like, "Because they teach me a lot about myself and about other people in this world that even if you do not want to deal with, you have to, because that's we were all put on this earth together and we can always learn and we can always have these conversations and we can always challenge people. And I think it's fine to challenge people, but the best way that I believe that we can challenge others is by offering them space for you, to let you become challenged as well. Now, I'm not going to change my views necessarily, but I think that if I go at it and I'm angry and I'm calling you names, and then you're calling me names back, and then we're just in a like a social media spiral. That's what I wanted to avoid with my essay. I knew after seeing a lot that I wanted to say something. And I knew that going in, people clock out nowadays. When you mention politics, people just kind of close their eyes and they snooze because they don't want to start fighting. I think people are tired of fighting. But we should welcome conversations. And I that's what I was trying to do, where I was just trying to welcome peaceful opportunities to open up dialogue.
I want to. A couple of months ago, I had the great good fortune to meet a person named Stephen Cady, who is the president of the Bright Divinity School, and he came across my radar on my radar screen because he had written an essay in Lent, basically saying that Bright was not going to be backing away from their DEI convictions, which I thought was very brave, and I wanted to know more. And so he and I got together and had a really amazing conversation that I would highly suggest, recommend. I'll post a link to it on my Substack or a link below. But I wanted to read something he said in closing, and it reminds me a lot of what you just said. Stephen said, "What do I have to learn from those who voted differently than me? We're going to have to figure out what it is that people are so angry or fearful about and get to that, as opposed to just pointing fingers at each other. But to your first point, I appreciate what you're saying about being thoughtful about what I put out there. I have 3 children. If I'm blessed with grandchildren someday, I also recognize there's going to come a moment when they're going to ask, what were you doing in this moment? What were you saying? How are you trying? I can't stomach the idea that I had some minuscule platform and didn't use it to the best of my ability to speak into truth and justice and grace and kindness and love above all else." So there's two competing, not competing things, but two very definite realities. One is you can't hate.
Yeah.
Second is you have to stand up.
Hmm.
What were we doing in this moment? And the two things can be achieved simultaneously. And I think that that is the solution. Excuse me, the solution to where we're at. Not in mass movements, but in individual lives and in individual conversations. Um, and so I also think that what we need to do more of is celebrating and holding up your voice, Stephen's voice, the people who remind us of the elements of the gospel. I have pastor friends who are having to lead mainline congregations now, which is like an impossible job, or excuse me, seemingly so in this environment. And they said it's a really hard job, but in another sense, it's easy because the words are all there in the Bible. You know,
Yeah.
what did Jesus say about this? And as you so, a wonderful choice to quote Matthew. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, or just raise as just a broad issue, is the future.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that I'm 67 and you're 23. You told me the other day, and I don't know how many generations there are, how many generations that spans, and Gen Z, X, Y, blah blah blah. Uh, but the future looks a lot different to me than, or the reality of it is different for me than it is for you. I'm much closer to the end of my years than to the beginning, and you're still at the beginning. And so I, I just think that it's really important, not only for old people like me, but I'm sure for young people like you, to have an eye toward the future. What do you think about that? I mean, I'm being the person you are. I know you're concerned about it.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I always like to say, I think in today's world, a lot of people are very quiet, silent rather, because they think that, well, even if I say something, it's not going to make a difference. And that's what I've heard time and time again, whether it's with voting, oh, it doesn't matter if I vote, or whether it's standing up for someone um, who's being persecuted. It's just, well, my voice, I'm nothing. I'm not the president and I'm not someone in power, so it doesn't matter. But so I'm scared for the future, to answer your question, because I'm scared that we're just gonna learn to be compliant. But I think the beauty of that essay that you just read out loud is that you can do your part. And even if like I posted on Facebook and it affects whoever is on Facebook and is maybe friends with you or friends with Harry or friends with my mother, and then they see it and I have shares on it. And yes, I'm not saying that this is going to be in a newspaper sent to all of the United States of America, but to the small circle that we do have it, I would hope that it kind of can start conversations like the one that we're having right now. I am scared that we're just going to lean more into hate because people are so polarized and we're starting to turn against each other rather than, I think, blaming the true evil that is with our country. Um, and I like to always say that, to my point of people are way too comfortable being quiet, that I don't do this for me necessarily. I do this for the person sitting next to me in my contracts class. I do it for you, even though we're not in the same age group. I do it for my family, even though they're older than me as well. I do it for my little brother. Most of all, I do it for my children. Like, I think about me possibly having children, and I think, well, if I have the opportunity to use my voice, even in very small circumstances, then at least I can turn to my kids. And whenever they ask, oh, in 2025, when all of these things were being signed and all these people were being called names and detained, what did you do? I know that you were going into your second year of law school then, right, Mom? Like, what did you do? I can say, well, I loved other people and I really tried to start conversations. And I spoke up against it. So I'm afraid that we won't all lean into that because if we don't, I'm not really sure what future we're leaving for those that are coming behind us. A lot of things are changing.
Well, you have a very good point that I think that it's just unnatural for most people to step out of their little silo and uh, interact in the world in a more in a way that was like we've been talking about, for fear that what's one person going to do? Think about, think about it this way. You and I are having this conversation. What if this conversation were replicated a million times? Which it is being replicated a million times plus, right?
Absolutely.
But it's not. Uh, but if every one of those million people said, "Well, why bother? Because what difference could it make?" These things. This thing that's happen on a personal level, and the other thing that, in terms of the future, we're just not wired as human beings to think about 40 or 50 years from now. We are still kind of locked into this reptilian brain where we're still worried about the tiger coming out of the forest when we're sitting around the campfire, and we're all hyper vigilant, we're full of fear, and so we live our lives that way. And so, okay, what's happening today I can't think about 50 years from now.
Right.
uh, and but we need to broaden the lens, I think. I found out a couple of weeks ago I'm going to be a grandfather, for the first time. A baby girl is going to be born to my son Patrick and daughter-in-law Allison, and we were just over the moon. Uh, and but I've been thinking like this for several years now, but now it's like times 10. There's very little I do in
Absolutely.
this world where I don't think about that little girl.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's incredible. But I think about that all the time. And I think even if we want it to be selfish, I think about, like, oh, what is my career going to look like if the law doesn't exist in 20 years? If it's little things. It's the little things that I think we fail to even think about.
Well, I'm really, one of my chief concerns is climate, and I
Me
want,
too.
and so that's always on the top of my mind. And but it's harder to think in these terms when you're living hand to mouth. It's harder to think in these terms when you don't, when just a day-to-day survival is kind of all, that's all you hope for. And there are obviously way too many people living in those conditions, not only in the United States, but all around the world. However, there are a bunch of people who are comfortable enough where they could broaden the lens, where they could start thinking. Uh, I've heard Pete Buttigieg talk about this. We need to start thinking in terms of 50 years from now, our children, our grandchildren, and start making our decisions both personally and in public policy based on that. And for me, like I said, I've been thinking in these terms for a while now, but now that this joyous family news has happened, it has kind of ratcheted up both my concern and my motivation to try to do what I can, in this moment. Again, not disappearing down the rabbit hole of politics with every one of these podcasts, but try to promote these kind of virtues and humanity and hold up people such as yourself. So we're coming to the end of our time. Anything, Counselor, anything you'd like to say in summation?
Sure. I think I would say that I don't have a huge platform yet. I hope to get one eventually. It's one of my biggest goals, but I don't have this like big platform to reach the masses on trying to give my philosophy, I guess, to just love one another and to realize that we are not that different. Geographical things are just kind of a matter of privilege anyway. I mean, did we really get to decide that much? Not necessarily. Um, and so I think my message is even if you only have 200 followers on Instagram, well, that's 200 people. And just like you just said, then that's another 200 and that's another 200 and that's another 200. And so if you're always waiting for the right time, it's never going to come.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned that. And I've had to get into that mindset, honestly, since law school, because it's so stressful that I was like, I can't be happy until I get this grade, or I can't do this until I get this job. And I've had to stop and slow down and honestly pray about it. And I've learned the time's never going to come where your life is 100% what you want it to be. It's just not. Life is crazy and things happen, and it's a roller coaster. And so there's not going to be a right time. The right time is now to use your voice where you can. And for those that are listening that don't think that they want to do that, that don't want to write essays or message politicians or like I'm personally not really a huge protest person. I like to write essays, preferably. I feel like I can reach people in a deeper way that way because it feels more personalized to me. And that's okay. You can find different ways to advocate that fit your lifestyle, even if you never speak, even if it's just you hold the door open for somebody and you say thank you and you look someone in the eyes like they're a person. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we all deserve love and respect, no matter who you are. It doesn't matter if I agree with you or not. You still deserve basic respect. So I would say just love one another. I know it's hard. I don't think it's fair to say that that's an easy task. Sometimes it's difficult to love a lot of the times. But if we follow love, you won't regret it. There's no regret with giving somebody some grace.
Well put. Thank you again for doing this. You're as advertised. You're as good in person as you are on the stage.
Oh, good to know.
It's like you know, you and I have never talked before, except for one brief moment in the theater when I told you how great you were, and you say you remember, but I'm sure you don't.
I do remember.
Oh,
I do.
You're a better person than me. But it's great, and one of the many things that I'm just so thrilled about having this conversation is that we do represent different generations. Mm-hmm. But look how much we think alike. You know, yeah. The language of the heart has no age. I've heard that said someplace, and I think that's really true. And if we can just start leaning into that reality. I'll close with this. It came to me as I was on my walk yesterday, thinking about this and what we were going to talk about. And this thought came to me based on your remarkable statement in your essay. The thought was, maybe I was created to be the change too. And then I thought, maybe we all were created to be the change. And I think that I think that's true. And with that, this has been the Anything Mentionable podcast. I'm Tim Madigan. Thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you again soon.